Hello, everyone. Roy Rogers here from the White Book and Second Sons, and I'm back with another one of these How on the Wyva videos. The last video that I did was focused on new players. It was focused on helping them get a sense of how the competitive scene works and giving you some basic deck building strategies and some basic places to begin for your journey as a competitive Game of Thrones player. And I will be returning to those topics in the very near future, but I want to do this video targeted a bit more towards enfranchised players. New players, of course, can get a lot out of this video because we're going to go into depth about how what I think is one of the most important decks in the metagame works, but it will definitely be focused on enfranchised players, particularly those enfranchised players who are trying to up their game in preparation for regional season or Gen Con, which is just about a month away from when this video goes live, just a little bit over, or some other big event. There's some Road to Stolic events in Europe that are coming up as well. So if you are getting ready for one of those events, you need to be ready for this deck. And so what deck are we going to be talking about? Well, it's one that I've talked about and recommended people play in previous videos, and that is Lannister Crossing. Now, to be clear, before we get to it, the version of Lannister Crossing I'm going to be talking about today is the Rush version. The original version of Lanni Crossing, way back at what feels like a lifetime ago, at the beginning of the core set meta, or just after the core set meta, which was pioneered by my Second Sons. There were other people, obviously, that probably did it, but was sort of popularized and made famous by my Second Sons co-host, Sid. Was not so much a rush deck, was more of like an aggro deck, like a high-pressure jumpers deck. That's not how the modern Lanni Crossing decks work. Modern Lanni Crossing decks are some of the fastest decks in the format. And that's why I think this deck is really important, because it's a predator deck. It's really a deck that keeps the meta honest. Now, you won't always see Lannister Crossing at every every tournament you go to. Not a lot of people necessarily like playing the deck because its game plan is relatively linear, although the newer versions, particularly the one we're talking about today, has a lot more sort of like cheekiness, a little bit more banter than some of the other versions that you saw. But Lanni Crossing, which did again like really well at Stolic this past year. A bunch of people on Team America took it. Chris Schoenthal, Tom Malucci, Ryan Jones, and I'm forgetting other people that took that deck. But a lot of the Americans who had Stolic last year took it and did really well. They were in the top 4, the top 8, the top 16, top 32, making sort of well, not day 2, but making the graduated cut and beyond. So really strong deck. And why do I view it as a predator deck? Okay, so it's a predator deck because while you may not see it at every tournament, it is a deck that when the meta gets degenerate, you can just take it out of your repertoire. Knowing how Lanni Crossing works and having it ready and having reps with it is really good. So if there's like a hyper stall meta, a hyper Night's Watch defense meta, a hyper mace meta, well, we'll get to Mace's relationship with this towards the end of the video, but just very degenerate metas, like a drowned god, that is the appropriate way to say it, meta that's just these slow, degenerate, grind you out, Martell Stag, like a characterless Martell Stag, gross, right? Well, if a meta just descends to that, Lanni Crossing is your out. It is the fastest deck in the format. Again, I want to emphasize this. Like Tyrell Crossing is close, but I really do believe, particularly this new version that the Californians pioneered, is the fastest deck in the meta. Now, I know that I should be clear here because I was given a hard time before. This was also the Italians also had a version of this. Nico played this to great success at Worlds this past year. So Lanni Crossing is not just, it has a long history with the game, going back from Sid sort of pioneering it in the Core Set Plus meta to Nico's smashing success in the regional season last year, the national season last year, and into Worlds. And then, of course, where the deck is right now, which is again pioneered by John Barber's victory at Kubla Khan. So there's a long spectrum of history on both sides of the Atlantic with this deck, just to be clear. Anyway, get back to how the deck works. So it's a predator deck because it just punishes those slow decks, those decks that just can't put up with the fact that you have Cersei Lannister claiming 3 power a turn, doing 3 intrigue challenges against you, heads on spiking you, just tons of stuff that it can just so much fast pressure that just like slow decks really can't put up with it. And it also has a lot of resilience because there's so much renown, because it's empty, and because its strategy isn't just like what makes it, I think, faster and more resilient than Tyrell is that Tyrell Crossing, to be clear, Tyrell Rush, is that its game plan is getting cards out of your opponent's hand. So on one hand, it's not just claiming power fast. all rush decks do that. But the fact that if that game plan doesn't work out, well, you've also emptied your opponent's hand, and you are consistently putting yourself in a position, thanks to Cersei and all that intrigue pressure, to just limit your opponent's options, limit their outs. So even if you can't close plot 2, plot 3, and you have to go into a grinder of a game, and I have seen Lanni Crossing games that have become grinders, you have the access to, through Cersei, to a longer planned game. So you have some redundancy built in. Now, the weakness of Lanni Crossing, of course, is that it can just kind of shit itself. It's a rush deck. It's running a lot of big characters, and you'll see there in a second. And it can just sometimes draw really poorly. It can just not run very well. Just, the same way Tyrell Crossing can sometimes do that. So you are asking, by bringing this, entering a little bit more variance into your game. But at the same time, Lanni Crossing is a really great meta call in degenerate metas. Like we saw that at Canadian Nationals, where people were bringing this and bringing Tyrell Crossing to sort of punish combo. And you can definitely see, it takes a lot of work, and you have to really know the matchups. Like look at Jake Platt, who played his, I think, top 8 or top 4 game on Rob's stream at Canadian Nationals. Like he really had to see all of his answers to beat that the Lanni Crossing player, who was at like 13 power when on turn 2 when Platt won. Like it was really close game, and it required Platt to really play extremely tight. So it really punishes degenerate decks, particularly as they get more and more popular, and the level of players who are playing them. Like for every Platt that can play combo really well, there are other people who are just sort of playing those kind of degenerate decks. Or Martel Stagg, for every Alex Black that plays that deck, or Chris Thompson that plays that deck really well, you have imitators who just aren't as good as them. And Lanni Crossing punishes those players who may not know all the outs. It demands, when you're playing against it, it demands extremely tight play, because it can just run away with games. If you make one mistake, this deck is going to punish your opponent if they make one mistake. And it gives, the nice thing about it, maybe it's a friendly for new players, it can also be a very forgiving deck because you just have so much renown and so many outs. So again, I want to just reemphasize before we jump in to what the deck's going to look like, that I think Lanni Crossing is a great Predator deck. It really is good at punishing degenerate strategies, going just too fast for them, and really just, the nice thing is you can tech the plot deck of a Lanni Crossing deck to really punish them. So it's a very flexible, its plot deck in particular is very flexible. So you can bring things in and out depending on what the meta you read in. Because the rush shell in the draw deck is pretty set, but the plots can go in and out depending on the meta and depending on what you need. So in many ways, it's a Predator deck, it's a policeman deck, it's keeping the meta honest. It's definitely something like, there's definitely strategies that my test group have been like, oh, this really degenerate slow strategy is great against this, and this, but it just loses to Lanni Crossing. And at a big tournament, you're going to definitely see people who that's their game plan. They want to bring Lanni Crossing to punish people who do that. And so we've stepped away from those kind of strategies because we just don't want to lose to Lanni Crossing like that. We don't want to just sit down and be like, oh, we lose to Lanni Crossing. And so, yeah, that's what the role of Lanni Crossing is. It's kind of this policeman, this Predator deck that really punishes slower, degenerate rush strategies. I think that's one of the reasons why Nico had such success in the World's meta, was because he was capable of punishing these Hyper Viper decks that the Indie / GTA / Seattle team brought to Worlds, and plus Jesse, team that brought the Worlds last year. That's one of the reasons why Nico was able to do so well and make it into very close to the finals. I think he lost his top 4 game, could be the top 8 game. Don't know it off the top of my head. But in the same true as you saw that also in the height of combo, you saw people bringing Lanni Crossing to punish those combo decks. So how's the rest of this video going to go? Well, the rest of this video is going to go basically the way all these other How and the Why of It deck tech videos will go. We're going to go over John Barber's Kublai Khan winning list. We're going to talk about how it works. We're going to talk about his strategies, his synergies. I'm going to try to go medium depth, I guess, here, reading a couple of the crucial cards and just talking more generally about the strategies and how the cards work. Then we're going to talk about how to beat this deck. Okay, so we've laid out why it's such a good Predator and why and what it does. Well, here I have 4 cards, 3 neutral cards and 1 faction card that I think does a really good job of hosing, or if not hosing, giving you the time, the breathing room to execute your strategy against these decks. So against these decks, these Lanni Crossing decks. So let's just get into it. Oh, and then finally at the end, I'm going to recommend actually somewhat of a surprise deck, which I think I recommended that this deck, spoilers, beat the other deck. I think these two decks kind of cancel each other out in really interesting ways. But anyway, we'll get to that. I'm pretty excited to share what deck I think can consistently beat Lanni Crossing. And yeah, so let's get to it. And let's start with John Barber's list. All right, so this is Barber's list that he won the Kubla Cup with. And it's a pretty standard but also very cheeky Lanni Crossing deck. So where should we start? I think we should start with probably the most important card, and we have to understand it in the deck. And the most important card in the deck, of course, is Cersei Lannister. And not the core set 4-cost Cersei, but the 7-cost Cersei. That's right here. Okay, Cersei is your engine to win the game. So Cersei, she's 7-cost, 6 strength. I'm reading her because she's so important, and I want to make this friendly to new players who may not have run into her yet. She's 7-cost, 6 strength, intrigue, power. She's a lady and a queen. Cersei Lannister does not kneel when declared as an attacker in an intrigue challenge. Reaction: after one or more cards are discarded from an opponent's hand, if you do not support that player, Cersei Lannister gains 1 power. Limit 3 times per round. Okay, Cersei is the engine that makes this card work. Not this card work, excuse me, this deck work. So as a crossing deck with the agenda, with the drawback of your first challenge being a -1 strength, you can launch your intrigue with a 5 strength intrigue challenge that doesn't kneel, so you can also use Cersei in a power challenge. And then so that is a benefit to her. Secondly, she's passively or actively, in the case, because it does require you to do a few things, gaining you up to 3 additional power per turn. And this deck runs tons of ways to support that. The first is Casterly Rock, which gives you an additional intrigue challenge, right? With Cersei, she can now do 2 intrigue challenges. So, boom, that's 2 power right there when you win. Yeah, and you can do things like your first one's 5 strength, and your second one's 6 strength or higher if you need to. It gives you options for 4 challenges. Casterly Rock also gives you options like very easily for 4 challenges, which again synergizes and give you a lot of flexibility. And particularly if your opponent's able to shut down your military or your power icons with kneel or icon removal, the fact that you can run up to 4 challenges, 2 of them are intrigue challenges, and it's going to be hard for them to pull all your intrigue icons. You have a huge amount of flexibility there. So, because not a lot of crossing decks can consistently every turn do 4 challenges and give yourself that amount of flexibility. All right. The other thing that this deck runs, of course, is Heads on Spikes, which is everybody's favorite card. Just clearly everybody's favorite card, right? Which I'll read this card too, because it's super important to how this, particularly how Barber's version of the deck works. It's a 4 income, 6 initiative, 1 claim, 6 reserve. Plot deck limit 2. It's Edict and War. We'll get to the War trait in a second. When revealed, choose an opponent. Discard 1 card at random from that player's hand. If that card is a character, gain 2 power for your faction and place a discarded character in its owner's dead pile. Okay, Heads on Spikes. Generally speaking, the way this deck works is you open trading with the Pentoshi, get your Cersei out if you didn't set her up, get some other things set up. You're good. Get your Cersei, get some Claim Soak, get Casterly Rock set up, and then you start going ham with Heads on Spikes. Because Heads on Spikes synergizes with Cersei. When you discard that card, that's a power. And if it's a character, that means you just gained 3 power off a plot. So in the plot phase, you just gained 3 power. That's ridiculous. And you still can get 2 more power on Cersei. Okay? Then this version is also running 3 Tyrion's Chains. Now, again, I'm going to read this card because it didn't see very much play. And I believe there was a version of this deck running around in Italy before last year as well. But it definitely wasn't very common in North America. And I still don't think it was super common even after the Italians were playing it. But Tyrion's Chain, it is a 1-cost event. Reaction: after you win a challenge in which you control a participating unique Lannister character, choose a revealed war plot card. Initiate the when revealed ability on that plot card as if you had just revealed it. Max 1 per phase. So that means on your head's turns, you can get, let's see. All right, so you did it in the plot phase. Let's say you live the dream. You hit a character. So you got 2 power from hitting the character. You got 1 power from Cersei. Okay? So Cersei then swings in for an intrigue challenge. She wins that intrigue challenge, discards a card. You play your Tyrion's Chain. You don't hit a character. Let's be nice. That's 4. That's 4 power, though. 1 from the Cersei trigger. 1 from the heads. Then you get the 5th power for the Cersei just getting intrigue claim. And your opponent probably doesn't have a huge amount of stuff. And then, of course, you get even more. That scales up if you get lucky and hit 2 characters. Super, super strong, right? Super, super, super strong. And you could just start claiming power so fast. Not a lot of decks can put up with on a deck that can do 5 to 7 power plus any additional renown plus the crossing power plus all this other stuff. Like, very few decks can put up with that, particularly when you can swing in for these huge intrigue challenges, these huge power challenges, because Cersei herself is a pretty powerful intrigue challenge just on her own. 6 strength, 5 if it's the first challenge. That's really hard for a lot of factions to beat without having to go all in, much less if she's doing it twice. And then she can swing in for power for 6 strength. Super duper strong. And you're running support for her, because so the other major card in this deck that's really important is Sir Jaime Lannister, right? Because Jaime doesn't kneel when declared as an attacker on a military challenge, and that's 5 strength, and he gains renown when he's in there. So that means it's 4 strength if it's the first challenge, 5 if it's the second, and he's not kneeling, so he can also then support his sister in the intrigue challenge if you need help pushing that through. So Jaime can do a military challenge, win the military challenge, get renown, swing in with Cersei. You're fucked. Pardon my French. You're out of luck at that point. And it's also running the Hound, who gives you a huge amount of options to sort of force through that military challenge, force through that power challenge, because he's constantly returning hand, constantly recycling. You've got a Janos Slint in here to give you some flexibility of Intimidate, so that you can go in with that big intrigue challenge with Cersei and Janos, kneel their big military icon, kneel their big power icon, allowing you to push things through, right? Or if they're going all in to defend intrigue challenges, you can swing Janos first on military, pump his strength, or attack with him and Jaime. Or you can do this Sir Gregor Clegane, who, you know, Sir Gregor is in the deck because he sometimes just wins you games, right? He's got 10 strength military challenge, and of course his infamous swinging his sword randomly reaction can just win you games. You've also got a mini, now a new card that just came in with the Martell box. You've got Marcella Baratheon. She's not kneeling when it declares an attacker with an opponent with fewer cards in their hand than you, and that's almost every opponent at this point. You know, but she provides a little bit of redundancy to sort of consistently get solid intrigue challenges off. She's there to sort of support her mother, very strong. You've got probably that classic Tywin Lannister. And then, of course, you have some other utility. Podrick Payne is a huge utility. His reaction is really great to save if you get caught off guard, or just the ability to jump in another character for that simple 2 gold, or maybe 4 if you have Tyrion. He's just a pretty good utility character. Same with Sir Emily Lorch. Pretty good utility character with conditional renown. Shay, also a good utility character. Same with Grandmaster Pycelle. Jenna Frey, who's pretty strong in this deck because you can get additional cards out of their hand, additional Cersei triggers if it's on the power challenge. If for some reason your opponent's counting Copper's turn, very, very strong. You have, let's look here. We're going to count Cersei as a form of renown. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances of renown in the deck. And then, of course, Cersei scales up. She's not just traditional renown. She can get up to 3 power without even participating in a challenge. So if she gets knelt out, if she gets her icons removed by Martell, she's just constantly claiming you power. All right, the deck also just runs good Lannister cards, which we've talked about a bunch of them. Tyrion, Tywin, Jaime, the Burnman, great utility, claim soak, or to push a surprise military challenge through. Grandmaster Pycelle, and then, of course, Treachery to sort of protect what's going on and what you're doing. These are just good Lannister cards that have been good since the core set. I think almost all the cards I just listed, except for the Hound. The Hound is just a good Lannister card, or Banner Lion card. So just good. So it's running this core of the Cersei package, right? Which is of course Cersei, the heads on spikes, the Tyrion's chain, the Casterly rocks, the Mycella to provide you with a little bit of redundancy. I'd also say that Jenna is kind of part of the Cersei package as well. The sort of hand pressure package that I think is the core of the deck and what gives it its explosive power. But and superior claims. So the Cersei / Rush package, right? And then it's running just Lannister good stuff in the form of the Tywin Tyrion combo, Tywin Tyrion Hound combo plus Treachery. And then, of course, it's also running a Jumpers package. That is one of the other things that's really frustrating about this deck, playing against it, which is it's running 3 Hear Me Roars, which is an event that can just put a Lannister character into play from your hand. It can occasionally do, it's most often used in challenges, but it can occasionally do some weird things in other phases because it's just an action. And they get discarded at the end of phase, to be clear. Never Bet Against My Family, which lets them pull a unique Lannister character out of the bottom 5 cards of their deck. And they also get, it's 0 cost, Kneels their faction card. And it gets, the character again gets discarded from play. What this really lets them do, though, and it's also, of course, running Burnmen as another ambush card, and it's running the Hound, another ambush card, and it's running Sir Osmond Kettleblack. All of these are sort of just a Jumpers package. We'll start with Sir Osmond, the least played. Sir Osmond's basically in there to jump a Jaime in for a win, or to be real obnoxious and jump a Gregor Clegane. It's only got one Sir Gregor. Sir Gregor is basically there as your like YOLO strategy. I mean, he can obviously just be used to close the game out. You just jump him in and get that renown because it's really easy. I mean, he almost always wins military challenges. Get that renown. You were at 14, you're now at 15. Boom, done. But he can also just YOLO if you end up behind and just be like, all right, I'm playing against this Tyrell player. It's got Mace, Mace. Oh my God, Renly, Randall, Marjorie. Well, I'll dump Sir Gregor Clegane into this, do a big military challenge. Boom, go to top card of their deck. Oh, hey, look, it's the Renly dupe. Boom, kill Mace. Something like that, right? And you can do that particularly against Stark. That's a very valid strategy. Against other Lanni Crossing players, a very valid strategy. Just, YOLO. That Sir Gregor Clegane could just do the same stuff that he's been doing since he came out in the King's Peace, just YOLOing people. And of course the Burnmen are just efficient, good cards. But like Hear Me Roar and Never Bet Against My Family, they are just there to sort of put surprise renown in, to make it so that your opponent can't, like Tyrell Crossing mostly is relatively honest. They have tricks, obviously. Some of them are running Emissary from Hightower / Snapcaster Mage. They're running the Olenna's Informants, the one that give additional power, and of course Hightower Spies to give additional strength. But those are all chuds, except for the Hightower Spy. So you can like sort of map out. Hightower Spies is a chud, but it pumps up their big dudes, particularly Randall, right? But you can sort of plan, all right, they have Randall. If I can control Randall in some way, treacherying their the Randall reaction, or treacherying the Hightower Spy. If you can just sort of control their big tools that they need to win the challenges, their Renlys, their Randalls, their Briennes, you're generally pretty good. Like the big characters that they're going to use to push through the challenges are very predictable. Now they have surprises that can add additional elements to that, but it's still the big characters they generally have to be on the board because they don't have huge ways to cheat in a Randall, cheat in a Renly, unless they have Marjorie. But Marjorie again is on the table, and so you just don't do military challenges against them, right? But that's not the case when you're playing against Lanni Rush, because Lanni Rush can just play Hear Me Roar and shit out of Tywin, and suddenly your whole challenge math is screwed up, and now they can push through that crucial challenge that they need to get off. Very, very strong. So the level of unpredictability and the ability that your opponent can't really predict how the challenge phase is going to go if you have 3 or 4 cards in hand is just one of the huge blowout potentials about this deck. And because of Cersei, and because of that first Nova winner, heads on spikes, you really can just blow people out. That's sort of the main thing that this deck can just basically do, is just blow them out. There's a lot of other cheeky things that this deck can do, though, that I think actually really accelerates it and has more synergy with Tyrion's Chain. So let's go through the plots. The way to see this is to go through the plots. So the first is counting coppers. Again, because you're running this ambush package of Hear Me Roar has never been against my family, counting coppers is great because even though it only has 2 gold and you don't have a lot of sustained economy, in fact, you're not running any gold producing economy in this deck. You have 3 Great Halls, 3 King's Roads, don't produce any gold that you can use to play like events or things like that. So, you know, the gold is relatively tight in this game, or this deck rather, and Western Fiefdom just doesn't use gold. Or doesn't produce gold, rather. Counting coppers is really great because Hear Me Roar, never bet against my family, is free and can get you a 7-coster. Hear Me Roar is 1 gold. It can get you a 7-coster even on a counting turn. Hugely important. Forced March. Okay, Forced March is generally probably, besides, what's the Martell plot? I always screw it up. At Prince Doran's Bequest, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, or Behest. Besides that plot, Forced March is probably the best card in the Martell box in Sands of Dorn. It also has awesome synergy with Tyrion's Chain because it is a war plot. So you flip it. You kneel their best. They have to kneel a character with a military icon. Maybe you even kneel your Jaime to kneel more characters, or your Janos to kneel more characters, or a Burn Man to kneel more characters. Okay, cool. They marshal, say, another 1 more military icon, or even 2 more military icons in the marshaling phase. You go in with your Cersei for a big big intrigue challenge. They can't block it or they can't win it. You then Tyrion's Chain and go into Forced March, and then you kneel out any characters remaining with military icons, which just lets your Cersei run even more wild. So this also gives you and this is one of the things that Tyrion's Chain was missing before, which was more than 1 interesting war plot to trigger. Because like if you drew your Tyrion's Chains late in the game, sometimes you already use your Heads on Spikes, because this deck does have a very linear game plan plot-wise usually. It usually wants to go trading, spikes, win the game. If you can't do that, it would be something like trading, Heads on Spikes, Forced March, Heads on Spikes, or some other plot. It could be accounting, it could be a First Snow. But anyway, it's generally trying to go trading, spikes, win the game. Tyrion's Chain now has a little bit more redundancy in the form of Forced March, which gives you, okay, the game's going on longer, I've already used my Heads on Spikes, and now I'm drawing my Tyrion's Chains. Well, I have my Forced March to give me an additional use for it. Those are no longer dead draws. So you now have 3 rather than just 2 plots in your plot deck that let you trigger your Tyrion's Chains. Ghost of Harrenhal is another one. This is super powerful against your opponent's resets, particularly against resets where they're able to cancel your saves, and we'll get to that in a second because this deck is very save dependent. Again, you are Cersei, you need to have a dupe for her or a bodyguard for her, because you're going to be stacking a ton of power on Cersei, and you need a way to get her back if something bad happens to her, and that's Ghost of Harrenhal. This deck does not run a close call, because Ghost of Harrenhal, while it has very low gold, only 2, it has 5 initiative, which lets you, again, set the tempo of the turn, set the initiative on the obviously, because the initiative sets initiative, but set the tempo of the turn. You can go first on a Ghost of Harrenhal turn, which is really necessary in this deck sometimes, and get your Cersei back, or your Tywin, or your Tyrion. Or Jaime, or someone like that. We've already talked a lot about how Heads on Spikes is probably the second most important card in this deck, besides Cersei and Lannister. Some people maybe argue that it's the most important card in this deck. The next, of course, is Fear of Winter. Fear of Winter is your reset. Now, some versions of this, I think the version that Chris Vack was playing at Thrones War, and other people that I've seen playing this. Sometimes some of them are running Valor Dohaeris or Valor Morghulis in this slot. I think it's whichever one you're running kind of depends on the meta. I think right now First Snow is really good. It's good against Tyrell Rush. It's good against Greyjoy. It's good against Martell. It's just generally a very good plot right now. And provide you with a reset, a way to thin the board out and push through your crucial challenges that doesn't risk you Valoring, either Dohaerising Valoring or Morghulising Valoring away crucial characters like Cersei, crucial characters like Tyrion, crucial characters like Jaime. And then, of course, trading with the Pentoshi, which is usually your opener, and generally speaking, your major econ plot. Now, this deck is only running one econ plot. And of course, the 2 initiative makes it competitive with the other common openers of Building Orders, Late Summer Feast, and not Song of Summer, Time of Plenty. So you can generally, again, set the tempo of the turn. Sometimes in these decks you've seen Summer Harvest, the X4-1, because it has really good initiative. But that's really risky in a Varys' Riddle world. Trading is, of course, a somewhat weaker opening in a world in which you're seeing naval superiority return a little bit in Martell Wars to Come decks because they use Prince Doran's Behest to get out that naval superiority, and that, of course, can definitely be a feel-bad moment for this deck and is a powerful counter strategy. But the way in which Martell Wars has kind of worked out at the moment is it's much more focused on proactive plots that sort of push through its game plan, because it's like somewhat close to a combo deck, or at the very least a mid-range deck that's looking to be as proactive as possible rather than reactive. Most Martell strategies before that were definitely reactive control strategies, but now you have more. Martell has actually moved in a more aggressive direction, and running things like Host of the Boneway and stuff that just is like pushing through challenges rather than reacting, and so you don't see as much trading. Now, of course, if you're playing against a Wausau player, definitely be on the lookout for naval superiority, particularly if they have a house card with Night's Watch. So I think that should give you basically a pretty good overview of how the deck works. And I've got four suggested cards that I think will provide you with really clear answers to them. And the first has been basically the card I have suggested over and over again because it is literally one of the strongest answer plots in the game. I'm sure you listening at home or watching at home already know, Barring the Gates. So Barring the Gates shuts down a whole package of their cards. It means that for a turn, they're Hear Me Roar, they're Never Bet Against My Family, they're Burnmen, they're Hound, they're Osmond, all basically are worthless. Are not worthless, but they're just much weaker, particularly the Hound, particularly those events. It means that basically they have to play honestly. Okay? And that's huge. It gives you time. It says, like, look, we're going to play this round based on what's on the board. And you are going to have to meet me toe for toe, particularly for, like, Greyjoy, which does have, in the form of, like, Asha and Euron, abilities at least a little bit to keep up with Lanni Crossing on the intrigue challenges. It can definitely give you some options. Stark, the ability, Stark doesn't necessarily love barring, but it definitely could use it, and we'll get to another useful card with Stark, or some kind of, Bara deck or something like that that's like this timed with some Neil can really just buy you more turns to get your game plan off and slow them down. Because the key thing that you want to do is give yourself more time. If you can stop their explosive starts and give yourself enough time to sort of stabilize on the board or set yourself up so you can reset your opponent, you're going to win the game. Now, because another thing that the Lanni Crossing players can do to play around resets is just sort of get to like 4 power on Cersei and 9 power on their house card. And so even if you can get rid of Cersei, like they're at 9 power and they are going to be able to close the game with their other renown, and their other renown is now safe to sort of do its business. So Barring the Gates gives you more time to slow that kind of strategy down to sort of prevent the game from being run away with all these tricks that the Lanni Crossing player has. The next deck is the King in the North. The King in the North, of course, turns off basically all the BS that, except the ambush, that Lannister wants to do. It shuts off Cersei. That's the huge thing. It shuts off Cersei. It shuts off Tyrion's reaction. It doesn't shut off like Casterly Rock or Tywin, but the fact that they can't trigger Cersei, particularly if you can pair this with one of their heads on spikes, is such a huge deal because it makes that plot way less attractive to them. way, way, way less attractive to them because they're not getting that up to 3 power swing and a card out of your hand and possibly killing one of your best characters. They're only getting the 2 power from the plot if they hit a character instead of that extra plot on Cersei. It makes their Tyrion's Chains less desirable. It prevents Osmond from doing his nonsense. It just it prevents them from getting gold with Tyrion. It just, again, is another plot that forces them to act honestly. Now, some Lannister players can tech against this by putting in the King Tommen or the Boy King attachment. Tommen is probably a slightly safer bet, I would say, because he's just kind of like a chud that you can put in as claim soak to protect your Cerseis, your Jaimies, versus the Boy King, which, because the deck currently doesn't have a lot of ways to kill your opponent's lords and ladies, isn't that useful. And so it's kind of like, okay, you got the King trait, but what if they don't have the King plot? You've wasted, like, the deck list is really tight, and you'd rather just double down on your game plan because, again, the deck has such a blowout potential than throw in all of these tech cards. But it's still an option for Lanni Crossing players to put in some King tech to get around the King in the North, which, again, shutting their Cersei off is just so powerful. The next thing about, speaking of shutting Cersei off, is not your King commands it, but it shuts off all their other renown. Cersei, of course, is a queen, and it's easy to forget that your King commands it also includes queens. But it does turn off Jaime, it turns off Tywin, it turns off the Mountain, it turns off who else do we have? It turns off who else has renowned? Sir Emery Lorch. It turns off it turns all of those power generation off. It gives you, again, another turn at decent initiative to slow them down. So these 3 plots, and again, I put them in kind of order, where I would say Barring the Gates is the best, King of the North is the second best, and your King commands it is just like a further redundancy. And again, the reason I really like your King commands it, and I keep recommending it, is that 6 gold. The fact that it gives you an answer to fast decks, while also giving you enough gold to be able to play cards and go toe-to-toe with them in challenges is really important and underappreciated. So the last card is a non-loyal faction card, and that is the new Arya Stark from the Faith Militant. The one that says this beautiful phrase to many of my friends who hate duplicates: while Arya Stark is standing, characters cannot be saved. So why is this Arya so good? Because, again, you're stacking power on characters like Cersei. And Arya says Cersei's going to die. And while you do have answers like Ghost of Harrenhal and other things, you really, like, getting your board Valored away or getting Cersei Varysed away thanks to Arya is just like, that's even better if you can Varys her away, because she can't come back with Ghost of Harrenhal. There we go. Super duper strong against them. So this means that strategies like Martell Wolf, Night's Watch Wolf, a Stark build that's running this Arya over the 3-cost Arya. Maybe some Faith Militant builds are. It's a little risky for Mono Stark, but it really just, this card hits the table, and Lanni Crossing players know that they now have a clock on themselves, that some kind of reset is coming, and they need to be able to close. And if they can't, then they're in trouble, because this Arya shuts off, again, a huge number of their strategies. That, again, the fact that now you're if they have a small board, because another thing that a lot of these Lanni Crossing decks do is they have very small boards, you can march away a key character or force them to have to kill a key character through military claim because their board was so small, as they weren't able to go wide because gold is so tight after that first turn. Arya is just, like, really powerful against these decks, and so that's, again, why I think that actually Martell Wolf and Night's Watch Wolf players that have experience, particularly like a Night's Watch Wolf that's running like the Sam Bratz card, the Crow's a Tricksy Bird, that can force your opponent to flip into an undesirable plot, and then you can play Arya, and then then reset them is just huge advantages. Martell has this Arya plus icon control plus bouncing to your hand can just really disrupt the Lanni player's game, and are all really valid strategies to beat Lanni Crossing. Because again, they rely on saves. They're running bodyguards, right? And they're running these dudes at 3x. Cersei's at 3x, Pycelle's at 3x, Jaime's at 3x, Hound's at 3x, Tyrion's at 3x, Tywin's at 3x. If you can make bad stuff happen on to several of those characters, you generally have given yourself enough time, enough space to beat a Lanni Crossing player. All right, so what deck do I think has a good chance of beating this? So the last time, I believe, when I did my Tyrell video, not the last video I did, but when I did my Tyrell video, I recommended Lanni Crossing as a way of beating Tyrell, and it definitely can beat Lanni. It can definitely beat Tyrell. But I also think that James Walmsley's Euros winning deck actually has a really good chance against this deck, against a Lanni Crossing deck. Why? Okay, because there are sort of two ways, I think, to beat Lanni Crossing. The first is, well, there's three. In the mirror, you can just go faster than them. It's a rush mirror. You go faster. Boom. You win. The second is to pressure and disrupt them. So that's where, again, Arya comes in. Arya really furthers and improves the Night's Watch Wolf, Martell Wolf, Targ Wolf, whatever attrition deck that you can do against Rush, right? That you can just make it so that those powerful power stacking characters like Cersei are not going to be able to survive, are not going to be able to stick around, are not going to be able to do what they want to do. Not going to be safe to just stack all that power. Wama's deck provides us with the third option, which is you go toe-to-toe with them in challenges, and then you focus purely on defense, where you're like, I'm going to defend the entry challenge, I'm going to defend the power challenge, I'm going to defend all your challenges that I can defend, usually intrigue challenges, force them to have to super commit, and then use some passive power win condition like Mace, or your own defensive renown in the form of Marjorie, in the form of Renly, in the form of, where is he? Randall, and things like that, to just basically say, look, I'm going to stop you from winning a bunch of the challenges that you want to win. And this deck has those options. It has the Growing Strong to pump things. It has the Nightmares to blank Cersei's. It has the Hand's Judgments to cancel treacheries, to cancel Tyrion's Chains, to do things like that. It has the High Tower Spies to pump character strength, to put them over big characters, even ones that have been pumped by Crossing. It has left and it has right to put a base 3 strength that doesn't kneel in front of all 3 challenges. So basically your opponent makes it really, their challenge math is also really difficult. It's running Crown of Golden Roses, which allows it to run King in the north. It's running Your King Commands It. It's running Filthy Accusations to kneel that critical character. It's running Pulling the Strings, that you can do things like hit their own heads on spikes. It's running Political Disaster, which can sometimes get you the chance to get their Casterly Rock if they don't have a dupe on it. It's running Your King Commands It to shut down their stuff. It's running Wardens of the South that allows you to go toe-to-toe again against even characters that are pumped for Tyrell by the Crossing agenda. And it's running Baking Ties, which allows you to return Jaime, to return other non-loyal characters like Shay, Marcella. You can't hit Cersei, but it can definitely return these characters, boom, and throw off their whole tempo, throw off their whole ability, Tyrion, their whole ability to get through the critical challenges that they need to get through. And then you also have a win condition that allows you to beat them, and that is Mace. Because Mace basically says, like, look, I'm going to defend everything, and then I'm going to constantly be gaining just as much power as you are gaining. Now, of course, the thing about Lanni Crossing and why it's so good is that it can just beat anything. You can just go Cersei on turn 1, or set up like Jaime, 2 Chuds, go into trading, play Castle Rock, Cersei, Rose Road, Hound. And then just go, and then get a bunch of power and go heads on spikes, hit Mace, heads on spikes, hit Renly, game. Right? And even a plot deck that is really crucially teched to beat these kind of matches can still take a crap out on you and still can't defend and still can't really do it. But there's a lot of outs, and I think a lot of Tyrell players don't really realize that. They try to go aggressive, and I've had a huge amount of success when I'm playing against Lanni Crossing when I'm very defensive in these matchups. And of course, Wama's inclusion of Varys also helps, right? So the ability to Marjorie, because they have to do military challenges, usually. I mean, sometimes they can, if they have Castle Rock out, they can ignore the military challenge and go intrigue, power. But that's still like, it's still, they're often going to be doing military challenges, and you can pull Varys, right? Now, and particularly the addition of Scheming Septon is another card, a card that, all right, they've got Tyrion out, they stealth your Renly, you can defend, and you can then swing the Septon out, block, prevent the unopposed power. They get a card, you pop them back in your hand, you're drawing a card and getting more gold to ambush other things or to pay for events. Also, Tyrell has the ability to refill their hand, thanks to now Scheming Septon, who's not in this list. You should definitely find room for him. But refill your hand in the form of, where is it? The High Tower, of course. That really just puts you in a strong position to see cards, even though your opponent is capable of putting a huge amount of pressure on you, right? Yeah. So I am generally very in the camp that Wama's deck here has a great chance of beating Lanni Crossing. But the benefit of Lanni Crossing, the reason to play Lanni Crossing is, of course, you have that chance to high roll anyone. So hopefully you found that video useful, that description useful. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about Lanni Crossing, what you thought about my analysis of Lanni Crossing, how it works, what I missed. I have a lot of experience playing against Lanni Crossing, but not a huge amount of experience playing Lanni Crossing myself. Anyone who has been following my public persona for Game of Thrones the card game over the last 3 or 4 years I've been involved knows that I really hate Lannister. I hate all of its themes. I hate its cards. I hate playing Tyrion. I particularly hate playing Tywin. I super hate playing the Mountain. I hate playing against the Mountain. When the day of this was recorded, Wama, whose deck we just featured there, put up a list of, what's the faction you least like playing against. For me, that is Lannister. I am on pre-tilt, even when we're doing playtesting, playing against Lannister. I am just like tilted the moment there's like a suggestion that someone's going to flip a Lannister house card. So I don't have a huge amount of experience playing against Lanni Crossing or playing Lanni Crossing, but I have a lot of experience playing against Lanni Crossing because it was Lannister and these kind of Lannister's, of course, always been a very popular faction, was a very powerful faction, one of the top ones for a long time in second edition. It's definitely declined, but this deck still is extremely powerful. So if you again are looking at the regional metagame and you are worried that somewhat more degenerate strategies are going to come, ones that are slow like Drown God or some of these like slower Mace decks or Martell Stag, these Barra Dominance strategy, these very slow strategies, you want to bring Lanni Crossing. If you also want to just be able to run hot with the tournament, Lanni Crossing is the kind of deck that you can do that. Lanni Crossing also teaches you a lot about how to play out to your outs if you're playing it or playing against it. So it's a really good deck to practice against. It's also a really good deck if you're in a deck building stage. So say you and your friends are building a deck for a regional, or building a deck for Gen Con, or building a deck for a Road to Stalk event. Lanni Crossing is like the #1 deck to test it against, because if your deck can't beat Lanni Crossing consistently, or at the very least doesn't have a clear game plan against Lanni Crossing. So even to say it's not the greatest matchup in the world, but you need to know what your game plan is against this deck. Because particularly if you go to a big event like a Road to Stalk or Stalk itself or Gen Con or one of the Nationals events, you're going to run into people playing Lanni Crossing, and you need to know how to. It's a Predator deck. It's designed there to keep the meta in many ways honest, because it's the fastest, deck out there. It in the way in which Game of Thrones, because you're about getting to that 15 power, that's kind of a very important predator that pushes out degeneracy. And that's one of the reasons why Combo was so crazy, is because Combo had a shot at beating Lanni Crossing in the ladies form, and was why you saw Danny bring the restricted list ban hammer down. So again, I hope you found this video enlightening. I will be probably finally getting to a Greyjoy video probably next week. And then after that, or right before that, it's either going to be Greyjoy or another new player video. But until then, have a good day, good week, good weekend, and hopefully that this video improved your play and got you ready for your next Game of Thrones competitive tournament.